Okay, the audio level for some reason of the. Hang on one second. I know what the problem is on my end. Give me just a moment. Come on, there it is. Okay, is that what it is? That's what it is. All right, let's try that one more time.
Come on, walk with me, talk with me, tell me your stories. I'll do my very best to understand you, your flesh and blood.
And welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Our program today is going to focus on, I'm not going to say a forgotten segment of our society, but I will say a neglected segment of our society for a wide variety of different reasons that we'll dive into with our very special guest, who basically is going to share with us his perspectives, observations, and awarenesses as a member of this particular group. He's retired U.S. Army Colonel Christopher D. and Kolenda, Ph.D. I want to welcome you to our program. I hope I got your last name correctly.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, Richard. It's nice to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about something that, like I said, it's unfortunate, and I shared with you. I won't go into it again here on the program because I've shared it before on this program about the misunderstanding that we have in regards to our veterans. And your article that you've put out had to do with what we're getting wrong about veterans' mental health. And one of the things that I find interesting, especially in, I don't want to say post-COVID, but it's getting close, although there are those who are saying we're never going to have post-COVID because it's always going to be with us. All right, fine. But let's say the pandemic will maybe tone down. Everybody around, well, most everybody around the world is suffering from one, I don't know if you call it a syndrome or what, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder or syndrome. And that veterans who have served in combat. I don't know that people who have members, because there are some who don't see combat. They enlist or what have you, and they never really see combat. And I'm not casting aspersions. I'm just saying it happens because you do have to have people, your infrastructure. You know what I'm saying? But many civilians now are suffering from PTSD because of a lot of the things that we have seen, that we've personally experienced, et cetera, et cetera. So there's going to be a little bit of a connection there. But talk to us a little bit about what it seems to be happening is that the stigma is starting to go away over the conversations surrounding mental health.
Right.
Especially because of COVID. That's one of the good things, if we can call it that. It's coming out of the pandemic. We're having the conversation now, and this now must most specifically include our conversations regarding the mental health of our veterans. What spurred you to write this article in the first place?
We lose 22 veterans a day to suicide. Since September 11th, over 7,000 service members were killed in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Over 30,000 veterans in that same period of time have died by suicide. Within the 800-person unit that I led in combat in 2007 in Eastern Afghanistan, 2007 and 2008 in Eastern Afghanistan, we've now lost more to suicide and overdoses than to enemy fire. So this is a huge problem, and a lot of it stems from lack of attention towards mental health. And when you have that lack of attention towards mental health, you increase the probability of drift. And when that drift is combined with post-traumatic stress and entry into midlife, you get a very dangerous cocktail, very dangerous combination.
There was a song by the late Harry Chapin about and the song, and again, I'm going to be as careful as I can in describing this because it's a very rough song about it starts out about with the birth of this black child, the black male, and it follows the progression of the stereotypical falling into gangs, falling into drugs, and all of these things.
Mm.
Finally, and this was during the Vietnam War that this supposedly took place, he was drafted. He was about to go to prison for some of the crimes, and he had the good fortune, as the song says, of being drafted. And finally, he is given a task that he seems to be very qualified for, and that is killing. And apparently, through the bonding process in the military, which I think that's a wonderful thing that is something that is fostered, that whole, the unit, right. No man left behind, etc. I've got your six, etc. Anyway, he apparently carries out this particular mission, and then he saves a bunch of his comrades, his fellow soldiers, and he's given the Medal of Honor by the President of the United States, who he has very little respect for. Anyway, so he goes through the process of his getting the VA benefits and this and that and the other, getting help. Then everything falls away, so he falls back to his old life. Winds up in a grocery store in a gun battle, and he dies. And what they find clenched in his fist is that Medal of Honor. And when they finally open it up and they see it, one of the officers says, "Where the hell did he get this?" And it kind of follows this one individual's path. And it seems as though there are those who, in our society, is it fair to say that many of the combat veterans came from middle and lower income and educational classes? And I'm not being critical here. I'm just trying to get some perspective on the lack of choices that they had. And so they felt the only option was to go into the military. When they come out again, now we have these problems that you're starting to describe to us.
Yeah, statistically, that's not the case.
Okay.
You've got people, and including my own 800 unit of paratroopers from all walks of life. And people had a lot of different options when they enlisted, and a lot of them enlisted after September 11th. A lot of different options, and they chose to serve. So one of the the story you tell is heartbreaking. One of the things I just undertook a 1,700-mile bicycle ride to visit the graves of the 6 soldiers from my unit who were killed in action in Afghanistan, and raise funds for the Sabre 6 Foundation, which is designed to support those who need help. And as I was cycling across a river, it dawned on me that this river is glacier cut. And when the glacier moved through this terrain, it changed it fundamentally. It created a deep groove that became the river. It created a floodplain where you can grow stuff, and it created heights on either end where you can gain new perspective. And combat is a lot like a glacier that moves through your life at a high rate of speed.
Mm.
It's like sustained trauma. It's this glacier that moves through your life at a high rate of speed. And it's something that can destroy you.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that can define you. It's something that can strengthen you. What happens with a lot of veterans who serve in close combat, and I mean the close combat where you're part of the killing and wounding, and you're seeing your friends get wounded and killed. Out there in the hinterlands where you're peeing in tubes and pooping in barrels. You have this, at the same time, you have this tremendous hardship, heartbreak, and heartache. You also have a tremendous sense of purpose. I am out here defending my country against the people who attacked us on September 11th. And you've got this compelling sense of belonging that the person to my left and the person to my right, they've got my back. They get me. They've got my back and I've got theirs. And this feeling that 300 million Americans want you to be successful. And you go through that, and that's an awesome feeling.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very powerful feeling. And at some point you leave all that. And you enter civilian life. And you start to think, man, I just don't feel that same sense of purpose. If I'm punching a time clock or, going to a 9-to-5 job, I don't feel that same sense of purpose. And, nobody out here gets me. Nobody's got my back. And in fact, some people are trying to stab me in it. And nobody knows how to help. And you can get this feeling of emptiness. And then you've got these memories, post-traumatic stress. Everybody goes through it. Everybody who's been through that has post-traumatic stress. I call it PTSN, post-traumatic stress normal. And when you have this sort of emptiness, you don't have that same sense of purpose and belonging. You have this emptiness inside. These memories become like a gigantic bell that's going off in an empty room. And if you can imagine in your mind's eye the sound of a bell crashing in an empty room, it hurts. It hurts bad. And all you want to do is figure out how to make the pain go away. And if you're not really careful, that can lead into substance abuse. There's a big opioid problem among veterans and among people who have post-traumatic stress. And once you're in drift, when you're in the river and you're drifting, there's only one way you can go, and that's downhill. Therapy might get you up onto the banks, might get you out of the river, might get you out of drift, but it's not going to get you to grow new things. It's not going to get you to soar to new heights. That's what we're getting wrong about veterans' mental health.
Christopher Kolenda is my guest. He is a retired U.S. Army colonel, and we are talking about the work that he is doing through an article he wrote about how basically we're getting it wrong about veterans and mental health as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is a pleasure to have a retired U.S. Army Colonel Christopher Kolenda here on the program to talk about this subject. It's one that usually only gets talked about, Christopher, during those holidays, if you will, or those days of remembrance, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, maybe the 4th of July, Flag Day, those kinds of things, V-Day, VJ Day, D-Day, or December 7th, and so on and so forth.
Right.
And it seems as though we do have a lot of them, but each one has its own specific focus in that respect. Some of them are to remember those who didn't come home. Others are to remember and to show honor and respect to those who did come back and and now they're struggling to make it through. I personally wish that we didn't need the military, and you probably feel the same way. On the one hand, it would be nice if we lived in a world where we didn't have to have that. But one of the aspects that I mentioned earlier that I find I've only heard about it because I have never been in the military. I've never served. Is that camaraderie, that brotherhood?
Right.
I mean, you talk about a family. They say that you cannot pick your relatives, but you can pick your family members. And in this case, you have a family that was there for you and with you. Going through everything that you were going through. And this is probably the wrong phrase to use because I don't think the movie was put together this way, but the phrase is a band of brothers, and that's what you were. brothers and sisters. I don't know if there were women serving with you or not, but
Yep.
obviously we have that now in our services. And that is something that I really wish. That's one of the things I think I like about what Israel does. It's mandatory that you, at least, what is it, 2 years, I think it is, in the Israeli army or the military, 2 years of service.
Right.
And if you want to continue on, fine. If not, but at least you've had that experience being in the service. And I wish we could bring that connectedness that you have experienced to the civilian world, especially considering how divided and polarized our nation is right now for a wide variety of different reasons we won't go into. You and your fellow soldiers, you all had different perspectives, different beliefs, different ideologies, and so forth. But that didn't get in your way, did it? How did you overcome those differences? What was it that said to you, you are more important than anything that you believe or anything that you think, etc., etc.? You're my brother, I'm your brother, and I've got your six.
Yeah, I mean, it's this sense of belonging that everybody needs. And you get it at a whole new level in the military. And it's it's something that we veterans can take for granted while we're serving. You have this great leveling experience called basic training, where it didn't matter if you were born on third base, or if you were born at home plate, or you were born outside the stadium. You got the same leveling experience, and you all came out with a bat in your hand, and you can make the choice whether you're going to swing that bat or not. You have all this unit history. You wear the same uniforms. You have bonding experiences where you are training together, living together, working together. And for the units that do it right, you try to emulate in peacetime, in terms of the importance of leadership and culture. You try to get people to operate as leaders and as organizations in peacetime as you're going to expect them to do in combat, because the habits you create in peacetime are the ones that you're going to take with you into combat. And you leave that at some point. You leave that organization, you leave the military, and that's when you feel that absence of belonging. And I describe this, this sense of purpose and belonging, and the emptiness that you feel when it leaves, and then the effect of post-traumatic stress. The other aspect of this is a thing called the happiness curve, and where the veterans that were in my unit, average age 18 to 27 years old, back in 2007 and 2008, they're now approaching the most dangerous parts of their lives. Mm. And the reason why has in part to do with post-traumatic stress. And then you combine that with they're approaching midlife. There are a lot of studies about the happiness curve, where the happiness curve looks like a U. And at the top of the U on the one end is your early 20s. The top of the U on the other end is your early 60s. Mm-hmm. The bottom of the U is age 47. And so when a lot of people are serving in combat, they're in their early 20s. They're at the top of the happiness curve. It's part of the reason why a lot of veterans will look at their time in the military as among the happiest days of their lives. And then you go through this experience, you have this feeling of emptiness if you don't find new purpose and belonging. And at the same time, you're getting older. And so you're drifting down the happiness curve. And for the ones who find new purpose and belonging, that U is pretty shallow, and they're ready to soar to new heights. They've found new purpose and belonging, and they're moving forward. They're seeing life in the windshield and not in the rearview mirror. A lot of people struggle with purpose and belonging, and that curve gets a bit deeper. And it's a very thin line between surviving and sort of muscling your way through that and crossing the line into substance abuse, self-harm, depression, and suicide. Mm. So this combination of post-traumatic stress, midlife, and a sense of being adrift, lacking that purpose and belonging, that creates that three-part deadly combination that people find themselves in, and is part of the reason for the alarming rates of suicide and overdoses among veterans.
Christopher Kolenda, retired U.S. Army Colonel Christopher Kolenda is my guest here on the program, and you are listening to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is a pleasure to have a retired U.S. Army Colonel Kolenda with us here on the program, PhD as well. What's the PhD in?
It's in war studies. So I actually got it after I left the military. I wrote a book called Zero Sum Victory, What We're Getting Wrong About War. It looks at Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and why our big interventions turn into these fiascos. Mm-hmm. So, one time is an accident, 2 times is coincidence, 3 times you've got a trend. We've got a very alarming trend, and this book uncovers the unforced errors that we make that heighten the risk that these wars turn into disaster.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you a lot of questions here that I want to ask you about, but I want to dive into something that you had that came to mind as you touched upon this whole aspect of belonging. And when a service person comes back, and why there isn't a longer, I'll call it debriefing, and why it is that, and this is where I want to go with this, pride gets in the way. No, I'm okay. I'm a tough guy. I'm not going to cry because big, this is what they're taught as children, probably, that big boys don't cry, et cetera, et cetera. I think the last time I had a real good cry was when my sister died at her memorial. But in the military, you gotta tough it out. You gotta put on your big boy pants, get out there, do the job, and move on. And there's no time for emotion. But what's tied to the emotional part of it is the pride. You've heard this phrase before, especially I'm sure in neighborhoods and so forth. Where the neighborhood knows that this particular family's having trouble, but the family was, hey, we don't take charity, and there's the pride again. Talk to us about that aspect of veterans using that as an excuse for not receiving the help and the support and the services that, quite honestly, they so richly deserve and need.
Yeah, that's certainly an important aspect of it. If you tore an ACL or broke your leg and you went to go see the doctor, nobody's going to call you a sissy boy.
Yeah.
But if you have an emotional injury, if that glacier's moved through your life and you're changed now permanently, and you want to go see a doctor, there's been a stigma for a very long time that, well, you just got to tough it out. You just soldier through it and you'll heal up. Well, when the glacier moves through your life, it changed you fundamentally. It changed you in very permanent ways. And understanding that and using it to strengthen you is really important to being able to move forward. You can't, if you're in a car, you can't drive forward if you're just fixated on the rearview mirror. You're going to wind up in a ditch. You're going to wind up crashing, wrapping around yourself around a telephone pole or whatever. And this is not dissimilar, where you've got to find ways to look through the windshield and finding new sense of purpose, finding that new belonging and fitness, whether it's physical, mental, emotional fitness. That's a kind of a three-legged stool, if you will, of being able to flatten that happiness curve and creating a life that you believe is worth living, an impact that you believe is worth making.
Yeah, I guess it could be summed up by saying you need to find a hobby, so to speak, and I use that term loosely. But at the same time, how do we in the civilian world help the veterans to belong, to feel that same sense of belonging? And I'm sure that's not an easy answer.
No, it's not an easy answer. And the feeling that I don't fit, and I don't know where I'm going, and I can't get anybody to understand is a big source of the challenge. And so it's incumbent on veterans to tell their stories more often, and it's incumbent on civilians to ask questions that help veterans tell their stories. And we've lost our ability to do that, in part because maybe 1% of society serves in the military. It's because we have an all-volunteer military, and it's a certain size, and so most people don't have the opportunity to do that, and so this distance has grown. This gap between the military and society has grown, and it's not healthy. So it's unlikely to change anytime soon. The number of people serving in the military is unlikely to change anytime soon. So we've got to focus on the things that we can do. And one of the things that we can do is just start asking better questions. Right now, when somebody identifies themselves as a veteran, what happens? You say, "Thank you for your service," and then you run away. Either physically run away or at least emotionally, mentally run away. It's like the end of the conversation. Thank you for your service. And that's it. You're done. Check that box. Game over. Instead of thanking somebody for their service, ask them about their service. Oh, you're a veteran. What did you do in the military? What branch of service were you in? Mm-hmm. Were you in the Army? Were you in the Navy, the Marine Corps, Coast Guard, Space Force? What was the happiest time in the service? What was the biggest impact you felt you made? What was the most good you felt you did in the military? You can ask these kind of very safe questions. They're all very positive, and get people talking a little bit about what they did. And that increases the level of understanding between people. And when people begin to understand one another, they feel like they both fit. But when it's just "thank you for your service" and run away, that's not communication. That's shutting off dialogue.
Yeah. Do you think that there's still as much animosity within the civilian world towards the military and towards the veterans in terms of what they did on the combat field, or in the theater, as it was once referred to,
Right.
as it was, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago, especially during the Vietnam War in particular?
Yeah. I mean, what Vietnam veterans came home to in terms of that animosity was utterly inexcusable. And I think as a society, we've learned from that. But in some ways, we've kind of gone from animosity to pity. Nobody wants your damn pity. What we want is, empathy. understanding. And so by asking those sort of questions that I offered is a way to bridge that understanding. And for veterans, we got to stop the, oh, I can't talk about it. That's nonsense too.
Yeah.
Oh, you'd never understand. I don't buy it. We can understand the experiences that people went through, not exactly the same, but we can get to a level of understanding that creates a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the things I talked about, glacier moving through your life, the bell going off in an empty room, are just simple ways that everybody can understand some of these feelings. And once you understand some of these feelings and understand what people are going through, then you can do things that help create that belonging. You can do things that help people find new sense of purpose, and that's ultimately how people move forward.
Have you begun or I don't know if it's past tense or present tense, gone through therapy, gone through counseling, gone through those processes to deal with what you experienced in your service in the military?
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it really important to being able to process those experiences and those feelings and figure out ways that, there's some aspects about it that are going to strengthen you. And there's some aspects about it you're just going to have to deal with. The terrain has changed, the glacier moved through. So what do you do with it now? I just finished a 1,700-mile bicycle ride I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And I was pedaling up a mountain in Pennsylvania, visiting the grave of Captain Dave Boris. Dave and I were very, very close. He's one of my direct reports. Probably the person in the unit, or one of the 5 people in the unit I was closest to. And I'm pedaling up this mountain. I've had nightmares about it, or I had nightmares about it for about a year before I did the ride. And this mountain's about 4 miles long, and it's a 7 to 11% grade. I've never cycled up anything like that in my life. And Dave was a big cyclist. And as I was pedaling up that mountain, I imagined Dave next to me, and talking about all the times we had together, and just making a lot of those memories. And we used to do these competitions called the Gunga Din competition after the Kipling poem, and it was everybody against me. And Dave beat me every time. So Dave would have beat me up that mountain, and he would have been taunting me a little bit along the way. And as I got to the top and got to the cemetery, I saw Dave's dad, and I just started sobbing. I don't think I'd ever allowed myself the space to grieve Dave's death in the way that I should have. And I learned that sometimes you got to open old wounds in order to heal better. And I found that to be very important.
I can relate to not the duration, mind you, but just the cycling in general. I used to bicycle everywhere, all over the streets of Phoenix and Glendale and so forth, because that's how I got around until I was 38. Bicycled everywhere, to and from work. Sometimes I'd put the bicycle on a bus and go quite a distance to get to my destination. But at least I had it to rely on if I needed to. And some of the hills that I used to pedal up, they weren't certainly as arduous as the ones you're talking about by any means. But I have to tell you how much I appreciate that analogy of the glacier. The glacier, of course, being the event that moves quickly through your life, whether it is a combat or in the civilian life. I'm sure we can find all kinds of examples of
Absolutely.
the glaciers that run through our lives. And we have multiple glaciers that will run through our lives. I'm curious as to your decision to seek help, to seek therapy and or counseling. Was it a struggle for you? Did you have that in the back of your mind of, no, I'm a tough guy, I can do this? Because you don't strike me as one of those individuals, exhibiting that real macho tendency. You're not. Don't get me wrong. No criticisms here, but you're not that. I'm not, the man's man kind of guy. You have a beautiful gentleness to you in that respect. But was it a challenge for you, even however far back it was, to say, yeah, I guess I should?
Yeah, for a long time I didn't talk about it either. Held a lot of things in and made a lot of mistakes because of that. And I found, and this was thanks to a World War II friend of mine who I'd met on the 60th anniversary of D-Day. And he was a medic in the 1st Infantry Division. He was on the first wave at, North Africa, Sicily, and Omaha Beach. And his name is Ray Lambert. Ray, afterwards, after the war, he suffered post-traumatic stress, bad. And he told me that a couple of years after the war, he was underneath a piece of heavy machinery. And he had essentially a nervous breakdown. So he wouldn't talk about it. He wouldn't talk about his experiences. He lost like 30 pounds. He didn't have 30 pounds to lose. He lost like 30 pounds. He had this nervous breakdown. He said he came just a fraction of an inch from being flattened by this piece of heavy machinery. And he said that the thing I had to do is I had to start talking. I recognized I had to start talking about my experiences. So he had gone to a counselor and just began talking about his experiences. It allowed him to process. And it allowed him to once you verbalize something, you can start to deal with it. Once you verbalize something, you can take action to handle it. It becomes something identifiable, not something lurking in the background. And that's what I found most helpful in talking with people. And some of those people were trained, professionals, and some of those people were just ordinary coaches and consultants, and friends. And the more I talked about my experiences, the more it allowed me to come to grips with them, to make sense of them. And then you can move forward. But if it's always this mysterious thing lurking in the back, and you have this body armor, that you're trying to shield yourself from the outside, it just grows and it lingers and it gets worse. That emptiness gets worse, and that bell gets louder as it goes off inside.
I have been through a number of therapy sessions in my life. I'm 62, and I remember there was a period within the context of my first marriage where I agreed to go to therapy. I went to 4 sessions. The therapist at one point, I think it was in the 4th session, basically referred to my personality traits as, her words, character flaws. That was the last session, and I never paid her. I said, that is not what a therapist is supposed to do. It's one thing to call you on your stuff, all right? That's one thing. But then to criticize what makes you who you are, that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to roll the dice with therapy or even just somebody that professional consultant or coach that you want to speak with. It's just because it can be very damaging. And one of the things I found is we tend to run across 3 kinds of people in our lives. I call them sappers, trappers, and zappers. So the sappers are the people that suck away our energy. It's the therapist who says you've got character flaws. It's it's the trauma dumper. That's just sort of dumping their trauma all over you. It's the awfulizers. It's the success shamers, the passive aggressive people. We've got those in our lives. And we want to create distance from them because all they do is suck the energy. And then there are trappers who try to keep us trapped in amber. So they like us just the way we are. They have a certain vision of us that they like, and they don't want to ever want us to change. And anytime we try to change, they feel that is threatening to the relationship, threatening to this sort of image of us. And a lot of times these can be loved ones. and so you've got to reassure them that the growth is not going to affect the relationship. And then there are zappers. The zappers are the people who give us energy, the people who are got to meet two criteria. They want what's best for us, and they're willing to tell us the truth. And those are the kind of people we want to hang around. One of the ways we can assess ourselves is by the 5 people that we spend the most time with.
I've got a buddy.
Are they zappers, trappers, or zappers?
I got a buddy who did a piece. It's a beautiful piece, runs about a minute and a half, and it's called Tater People. And they're commentators and agitators and so forth. And he goes through and it's just a beautiful piece. And hesitators, and I'm trying to remember the final one that's, if you find one of these people, you give them a hug from me. And those are the ones that are there to support you and
Right.
so forth. They're not there to cause problems, more problems than you already have.
Right.
But it's really a cute piece. We're talking with Christopher. We're talking with the retired U.S. Army colonel, and we're talking about the work that he is doing through an article that he has written. Christopher Kolenda is my guest, PhD, internationally renowned combat leader and diplomat, who is sharing basically where we've collectively gotten it all wrong about veterans and their families. And that's another area we can talk about as well as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is a great pleasure to have our very special guest, retired U.S. Army Colonel Christopher Kolenda. And I want to ask you about this aspect of the families of the veterans.
Right.
They're going through, I've heard it described this way, they're going through their own form and or levels of PTSD, because you never know. I mean, there's a country song that talks about raising a glass to those who didn't make it home, something along those lines. Talks about how they're all expecting, I don't know if this was 4th of July, some celebration they're holding, and talking about how they're getting everything prepared, and all of a sudden there's a knock on the door, and 2 servicemen are standing at the door, and you know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not what they wanted, with the yellow ribbon around the tree out front and so forth. So they're going through their own, if you can put it this way, they're going through their own hell. They're going through their own glacier through their lives. Talk to us a little bit about that and how you and the work that you're doing, and especially in this, let's say in the context of this article, how we're missing it there with the veterans' families.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The glaciers move through their lives too. And it could be that their loved one was wounded. Could be that their loved one was killed. Could be that their loved one came back very different. And those are different forms of glacier that move through a person's life. And we've got a lot of services for veterans, of course, through the VA. But those services are often not extended to family members unless you're a Gold Star family member. And so a lot of people are dealing with this kind of trauma, and again, I call it post-traumatic stress normal, because everybody experiences, it's normal. All normal people are affected by these experiences. And yet you're told that you have a disorder, that you're broken, that you need fixing. Some people who are deep into drift, you've got to, that requires a significant intervention. Most of us who have post-traumatic stress normal, that everybody else goes through, once you get that, And then you find the right people to talk to. You find a way to use those experiences to strengthen you and give you new purpose and belonging. That's when you move forward. And family members are affected in similar ways. I've got a Gold Star family member on my board of directors in the Sabre 6 Foundation, which we set up to help the 800 surviving members of the unit and their families. Her husband was shot, mortally wounded in late August of 2007. And we eventually got him evacuated to San Antonio, where Karen, Chris Pfeiffer's wife, met him in the hospital, and so did his parents, Mike and Darlina. Karen was 9 months pregnant. Chris fought for his life for a month and succumbed to his wounds on September 25th of 2007. The next day, Karen went into labor, and the day after that, their daughter Peyton was born. So Peyton never met her dad. And, Karen told me that for a long time, she was in drift. And finding new purpose and belonging has been absolutely vital to her. And I love the way that she's an exemplar to others to say, I've been through this. I've walked in your shoes. And I know how to look through the windshield. I know how to get through this, and I'm going to help you do it.
The closest that I can come to any connection with the military and family members serving, none of my immediate family, father, brother, or sisters, but we had a friend through my mother's mother. We called him Uncle Joey. And I remember hearing about his going off to the Vietnam War. This was in the late 60s, maybe
Right.
very early 70s. And that I'm not even sure I remember the story correctly, because I was in my late single digits and early teens. That I don't know whether he made it back or not. He was just a cool dude. He really was. And the one thing that disappoints me in regards to losing family members, or anybody else for that matter, within the context of the military is, I put it this way, is the lost potential. What could they have contributed to our society in a very positive way? It's kind of like what you talked about in terms of the questions to ask a veteran, instead of just saying, thank you for your service. I like that one question about, well, what was your happiest time? And what do you think was the one thing that you the contributing that you contributed to the betterment of, and so forth.
Right.
And I thought, wow, if only we had a lot of these hundreds and thousands of citizens who chose to serve, if only we still had them with us, contributing to our society. That, to me, that's one of the great losses. By the same token, I also do know, and maybe you can address this a little bit, as maybe this is part of the help for veterans, and that is some of the skills they actually do learn within the military. I'm sure that there are many mechanics in the civilian world who used to be mechanics in the military, working on the Jeeps and the tanks and all of the other things, and maybe engineers, and and the list goes on, cooks and so on and so forth. Do you think that those aspects of military life, where you get the training for these types of jobs, even though they're obviously this is what you're going to do, you're on KP, you're going to be peeling potatoes for a week, kind of thing, but that those are some things that veterans might look at and say, you know what, yeah, I used to do that pretty darn well, and it gives me something to do, but also that sense of belonging to something that I can do well.
Yeah, helping veterans, identify there's a difference between skills and natural talents.
Mm-hmm.
And if you put it on a kind of a double axis chart, where you have natural talents on the north-south and skills on the east-west, you get one quadrant, the lower left, where you have low natural talent, low skill. That's kind of your dropout zone. Like nobody wants to be there. That's where he's like, this isn't a good fit, and you leave. Where a lot of people find themselves is in the lower right, where they've got the skill to do something and they do it well, but they hate it. It's not a natural talent. And so that's the burnout zone. And a lot of people will take what they did in the military and try to translate it over into the civilian world. And it may not be something that they love to do. And you can do it to a high level of proficiency, but it burns your energy faster.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in the upper left, it's a natural fit for you, but you just don't have the skills yet. So you're in a high talent, low skill. That's something you need to cultivate. You need to cultivate the skills so that you can move into the upper right, your high skill, high natural talent. And that's where you're going to soar to new heights. And so one of the things that we need to do better as veterans, as people exit the military, is helping them to understand their natural talents, their natural affinities, and then helping them then find roles that fit those natural affinities. You can always build skills. Yeah. Building skills is easy. You can't build natural affinity. You're born with it. So help people understand their natural affinities, and then you can develop the skills so that you can make the most of them. And we need to do a better job of that. I've got something on my website called the PROM archetype. So it stands for Pioneers, Reconcilers, Operators, and Mavericks. Take a quick 8-question self-test, identify which one you are, and it gets you on the dance floor in terms of what are my natural talents, what are my natural affinities that then I can start to work with.
We're talking with retired U.S. Army Colonel Christopher Kolenda. We are talking about better ways of supporting the veterans coming back, specifically from combat, from whatever the conflict was or is. I don't know that we're involved in any particular conflicts right now directly, as far as boots on the ground. I'm not sure anywhere else in the world right now, because I know we're not sending troops to Ukraine, and so we just pulled out of Afghanistan, and there was a part of me that knew it didn't matter who was president and how we left; it was going to be a mess regardless. The Russians were there for 10 years. They failed. We were there for 20 years and didn't seem like we accomplished a whole lot. And it seemed to me like the prime directive should have applied, that non-interference, let them figure it out. But if they want our help, okay, we're here to help. I don't know. I'm no strategist, let alone diplomat. All I know is it's like you were talking about those 3 levels. The first time is sort of an accident, so to speak,
right,
and so forth. And it's like we're in a trend.
We're in a trend
with Afghanistan.
Yeah, we're in a trend. It's not okay.
No.
It is not okay to spend 20 years, have over 2,300 killed in action, tens of thousands wounded, even more than that with wounds you can't see.
Yeah.
And have it all come down, crashing down like a house of cards.
Yeah.
And we have this pattern of behavior. Part of the reason why I undertook this ride, part of the reason why I wrote the book Zero Sum Victory is, this is not okay. This is not acceptable. And our soldiers do everything that we ask them to do, and they do it to a high standard. Much of the time, we're not asking them to do the right things, or we don't have the policies and strategies in place that to help us be successful. And we have recurring patterns that I show in this in this book about the things that they're relatively low cost to fix and high payoff when you do. But it's not okay just to send people into harm's way, knowing that they might get wounded, knowing that they might get killed, knowing that all of them are going to have this glacier move through their lives and affect them permanently, and not have your act together in your policy and strategy. We need to fix that. There needs to be some accountability. And I think the most important accountability is the reforms that we need to make, so we reduce the likelihood that we have another intervention like that turns into a fiasco.
Well, it would be nice. It would be nice to do that. I know too that I'm not sure if this is statistically accurate, but at least to the present day, I think our Civil War has been it is still the highest loss of human life. And what's so sad is it was Americans on both sides, and that's to me the saddest part, that we were, there's the joke about the Irish. I happen to be a little Irish of Irish descent, and they'll fight like hell on Saturday, and then they'll go to mass on Sunday, and so forth. But it's their fight, and they'll work it out, and they'll figure it out. And unfortunately, we, even to this day, I don't think we figured it out yet. Because there's still those issues.
One of the things that helped us be so successful, our unit be so successful in Afghanistan, we motivated a large insurgent group to stop fighting and to switch sides. It was the only time it happened in the 20-year history of the war. And it was because we recognized that you make a lot more progress building bridges than you do building trenches.
Yeah.
And right now we've got a lot of people building trenches, fortifying themselves, being very comfortable in their silos, and not building bridges. And I think real courage is not your ability to shout from your silo, being cheered on by everybody who's in that same silo. Real courage is being able to walk between those silos, where you're exposed, you're vulnerable, and to find ways to work with people who have different views than you. They're good people in both silos. And by, that intellectual diversity, if you will, can create solutions that can move this country forward. But you're never going to get there if you're just sitting in your silo, content and yelling at the other side.
And there's another aspect of it too. And I've I've interviewed a number of people on this subject of business and doing business in other parts of the world. And you do not go into these other parts of the world trying to do business the way you do in the United States. It won't work. And specifically, we were talking about, in this case, China. You do not go over to China and start to throw your weight around because you got all this money, this giant corporation, et cetera, et cetera. You have to learn their culture. You have to learn their ways. It's not that you convert, but you diplomatically learn how to communicate. Again, build those bridges. And it seems as though, even though I know there have been the examples of many soldiers who learned to speak the language in the land they were in, many of the soldiers didn't. And they didn't know the culture and the ways in which they did things. To me, it sounds to me that's part of what you're talking about, is that, we're Americans and we're going to go in and we're going to do what it is that we need to do the way we need to do it, and ignore the land that we're in and the ways in which they do things. And I'm not speaking even militarily. I mean, even dealing with civilians. Do you see that has that been something that has been slowly brought into the process, saying, we've got to learn how these people live, not go to war, but how they live, and understand that, so that we can help them in a better way?
Yeah, well, it highlights the importance of empathy, and whether that's in business, with your employees, or with your customers, or in combat when you're working together with civilians and local military forces, etc. Empathy is vital. Being able to understand how somebody else sees you, being able to understand how somebody else sees a situation, and what are their objectives, what are their fears, what are their interests. That's what empathy is all about. It's understanding how people see a certain situation, how they feel about it. Sympathy is pity. You don't want that. You're not going to get anywhere with that. But empathy is what helps you build that bridge. And that was, some of the biggest breakthroughs that we had in Afghanistan in our unit's experience was being able to see their point of view, how they saw us, how they saw the situation. And once we understood that, we could find ways to work together. But if you don't understand it and you just do things that you think are right because you're convinced that you're right, then you're going to do a lot of things that have huge unintended consequences.
That's a phrase that came up a decade or so ago, unintended consequences. And I couldn't agree with you more. Give us the title of that book one more time.
It's called Zero Sum Victory: What We're Getting Wrong About War.
Zero Sum Victory. We certainly hope that you'll get a copy. You can go to Christopher's website. We certainly encourage you to do so. It happens to be strategicleadersacademy.com.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yep.
strategicleadersacademy.com. You'll find out more about Christopher and the work that he is doing. You can also go to him. You'll find him. I'm not sure if we found you. No, I don't believe we did, but nonetheless, you're on LinkedIn, certainly Twitter, Facebook as well. You can find him there. And we certainly hope that you folks will certainly go to the website. We will be linked to your website too, Christopher, so that folks can click on that and go straight to your website and find out more about you, get a copy of the book, Zero Sum Victory, and learn more to where they can help, they can support, they can encourage, and so forth. And we'll do so as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Christopher Kolenda is my guest. He is a retired U.S. Army colonel. I wanted to ask you one final thing in regards to your own personal philosophy, faith, if you will, and what, if any, that has played not only in your service, but also in your being there for your group.
No, thanks for that question. And I would add to the website, you can also go to saber6foundation.com, and that's the website that goes to the foundation that supports our unit's 800 veterans and their families. I found that leadership doesn't stop when you take off the uniform. That sense of love for the people who you served with in combat, who had my back for 15 months. That never goes away. Doesn't go away when you take off the spurs. It doesn't go away when you take off the uniform. And one of our best non-commissioned officers back in 2007, top 1% guy, he's going to be a sergeant major one day. He now lives in a dumpster outside of a city library in Northern California, and he's a meth addict. And he's one of a number of stories like that. I can't know this is happening to people who had my back, people who, I love. and not try to do something about it. So that's why I did the 1,700-mile bicycle ride. That's why I set up the foundation. We've got some people in Justin's situation. We've got a lot of people who are just trying to find new purpose and belonging. And once they do that, purpose, belonging, and fitness is the key to looking through the windshield, and reaching new heights in your life. And that's what this foundation is all about.
What's the motto of the U.S. Army?
The motto of the U.S. Army.
Or is there one? I don't know.
It changes a lot. Back when I was in the 1980s, when I came in, it was "Be all you can be." I thought that was great. It's evolved over time. Frankly, when you put me on it, I can't recall it right now off the top of my head, but "Be all you can be" from 40 years ago, man, that sticks in there. That was something special.
Is there a motto that you would come up with today, aside from "Be all you can be," that would describe, let's say, you and your unit?
What made me most proud about our unit, Alexis de Tocqueville, when he wrote Democracy in America, he said something to the effect that, the greatness of America is not that we get everything right. It's that, we fix our blemishes. We fix our errors pretty quickly. And the ability of that unit, and those troopers to recognize a situation was very different than what we all expected, and to adapt, and then to do things that wind up motivating a large insurgent group to stop fighting and switch sides. I mean, that was something special. And when you talk about what are some of the skills, what are some of the things that veterans bring to the table, it's not so much job skills. I mean, that's part of it, but it's leadership, it's perspective. It's the sense that, hey, I know how to work with people who don't think the same way that I do. In fact, I worked with people who spoke a different language, had a different, by and large, a different religion, and a totally different culture and set of beliefs. And you know what? We were able to figure out how to build bridges, and make that work. So, every time I think about the impact that those 800 had on that situation, and just seeing how people are supporting each other nowadays, makes me very proud to serve.
I applaud you for your tenacity on that 1,700-mile bike ride. The longest distance bike ride I've ever done, and this was with my first wife on a tandem bicycle built for two, was 60 miles. And that was arduous in and of itself.
That's a long way on a tandem.
So my hat is off to you, sir. Literally and figuratively. That is no mean feat, to say the very least, and for if you will allow me, a very worthy cause to honor the loss of the lives of 6 of your fellow soldiers who, or paratroopers, I should say, who lost their lives. I think that one of the things that I've read about in regards to military, and we're going back centuries here, is the difference between today and then, in those times, was that when the soldiers came back from their conflict, win or lose, the community honored them, celebrated them for their willingness to go and fight for them. And to me, that is the biggest difference between then and now, is that I guess you could say that, thank God we were victorious in World War II, but that was the last time we had any kind of honoring of our military, was those parades down the major metropolitan cities, New York, and I'm sure Chicago and Los Angeles and so forth, once World War II was over, with the ticker tape parades. I don't know that we've ever done that since, or anything.
Well, there's one at the end of the Gulf War.
Was there at the end of the Gulf? Okay.
Yeah, I think the bigger issue is, in World War II, you had shared sacrifice.
Yeah.
if you were at home, you're in the factories, you're undergoing rations and, all of these different things to support the people overseas. Everybody went through their version of different traumas and shared sacrifice. And we haven't, it hasn't been the case since.
Yeah.
And I think as this divide has grown wider between the military and society, and we've lost our ability to communicate with veterans, that this is very damaging. And I think they're very simple ways that we can communicate better with veterans, and start to rebuild those bridges and help people find new sense of belonging.
Yeah. Well, what I take a look at is the Russian army right now battling Ukraine, for or against, regardless. I find it fascinating, the reports coming out that are saying that a lot of the soldiers, they didn't want to fight. They wanted no part of this, and they were forced into it. And that now they're having all kinds of losses left and right as far as territory as well as loss of life. And it's like, if both sides said, you know what? If you guys want to fight, you politicians, you come out here and pick up the arms. We're not doing this for you anymore because you guys are the ones that started this in the first place. There's a certain element of truth to that, but obviously that isn't the way things play out. So, anyway, Christopher, I want to thank you for your time and your story. And I really do appreciate the work that you're doing in this regard to help this segment of our society to become a part of our society, to let them know that they do belong. I've often said this of different groups who feel that they're a minority. I say, okay, first of all, are you human? Most everybody answers yes. And I say, then you belong. And of course, here we are in America. And you're an American, right? Okay. Then you belong. End of categorization. We're done. You belong on just those 2 points. Okay? So don't ever question that again. You belong. I don't care what anybody says to you. You belong. You're a human and you're an American and you belong. And so we want to get that a point across. I do have 3 final questions I want to ask you before we wrap things up that I ask all of my guests, and you may have answered them during the interview, but I like to ask them directly. Before I do, let me thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We're here Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and Wednesdays for a special edition of Tell Me Your Story. And that's at 9 a.m., and we stream live at those times at richarddugan.com with podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many other locations. And you can watch these interviews on YouTube. That's right, we have a channel, Richard Dugan, Tell Me Your Story, on YouTube, and we certainly hope they'll do that. You will do that. We'll also be linked to Christopher's website, Strategic Leaders, and I've already forgotten the name of it, Strategic Leaders, there it is right there, Academy, strategicleadersacademy.com. It always helps to have that up on the screen, doesn't it? And we certainly hope that you'll go to the website and also get a copy of his book. Again, Zero Sum Victory is the title of the book. And Christopher Kolenda is my guest. And we also hope that you'll spend some time going within, listening to that still small voice and spending some quiet time during this decade of perfect vision. And if you'd like to support us financially, we'd be gratefully appreciative. We have a PayPal account. It's there for your security as well as ours. And with that being said, the first of my 3 questions are, or is who is Christopher Kolenda?
Well, I'm a leadership consultant. I help leaders and coaches live lives in ascendancy, which means that they continue reaching new heights. I'm a dad, and I'm a husband, and I'm a veteran, and I cycle for great causes, and I write books that help change people's lives.
What is your life's purpose?
To help people reach new heights. That's what I see as my life purpose.
Final question. What was your best day?
Yeah. Well, I can answer that in a lot of different ways, depending on, you know, birth of my kids, marriage to Nicole, on a personal level. The day that this big insurgent group stopped fighting and switched sides, it wasn't a single day. It was kind of a process.
Mm-hmm.
And then the everyday things about, sometimes you just never know how you're going to touch somebody's life in a positive way. And, those notes from, whether it's from, the people I work with, the leaders and coaches that I work with, or people that I served with back 15 years ago, just the things that say, hey, you did this and it made a difference. That's pretty cool.
Well, Christopher Kolenda, I thank you for joining us here on the program. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope that we get a chance to talk to you again and down the road.
Thank you, sir. It's great. I appreciate you having me on your program.
And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal and Jeanette, I am listening.